Gravel and Gavel, the millionaire heir who became a triple murderer. Tim Bosma had no way of knowing he was about to become part of one of the most shocking criminal investigations in Canadian history. To him, it was just another evening, a chance to sell his truck, a chance to make a little money and move on with life. He had listed his pickup online and received interest from potential buyers. It was the kind of transaction that happens every day. Meet the buyers, answer a few questions, let them take a look at the vehicle, maybe go for a short test drive, and if everything looked good, complete the sale. Simple, routine, forgettable. On May 6, 2013, two men arrived to look at the truck. One of them was named Dellan Millard, the other was Mark Smick. Tim greeted them. The conversation seemed normal. The men appeared interested. Nothing immediately raised alarm. At some point, Tim got into the truck with them. The vehicle pulled away. His wife watched him leave. She expected him home soon. He never came back. Within days, investigators would discover that this missing persons case was something far darker. Within months, police would begin connecting Tim's disappearance to another missing person. And eventually, investigators would uncover evidence leading them toward a third death that had already been ruled a suicide. At the center of every twist, every mystery, and every investigation stood one man. A wealthy aviation heir, a young millionaire with access to nearly everything he could ever want. A man who appeared to have been handed the perfect future. This is the story of Dellan Millard, and how a simple truck sale exposed a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. To understand why this case shocked so many people, you first have to understand where Dellan Millard came from, because unlike many notorious criminals, Dellan was not a product of desperation. He did not grow up struggling financially. He did not come from a broken criminal underworld. He was born into privilege. The Millard family was well known in Canadian aviation circles. For decades, Wayne Millard had built a successful business empire through Millard Air. The company provided aviation services and support to major clients. It was respected, established, profitable. The business allowed the family to enjoy a level of wealth most people only dream about. Private aircraft, large properties, luxury vehicles, connections within the aviation community, the kind of lifestyle that suggested security and stability. From an early age, Dellan appeared fascinated by aviation. He showed talent, intelligence, confidence. People who knew him often described him as charismatic and capable. Many believed he would eventually take over the family business and continue the Millard legacy. The future appeared mapped out. But beneath that image of success, another side of Dellan was beginning to emerge. Friends later described someone who enjoyed risk, someone who sought excitement, someone who appeared drawn toward increasingly reckless behavior. Prosecutors would later introduce evidence suggesting Dellan participated in what he called missions. These were late-night adventures involving theft and criminal activity. What made these allegations unusual was that money didn't appear to be the primary motivation. Dellan wasn't stealing because he needed to survive. He wasn't trying to pay rent. He wasn't feeding an addiction. According to testimony, he seemed to enjoy the thrill itself, the challenge, the excitement, the feeling of getting away with something. For some people, breaking rules becomes addictive, and investigators would eventually ask whether that appetite for risk evolved into something much more dangerous. As Dellan entered adulthood, he surrounded himself with friends who shared many of his interests. One of those friends was Mark Smick. The two men developed a close relationship. Over time, their names would become permanently linked. At first, however, nobody viewed them as future murder suspects. They were simply young men enjoying life, or at least that was the appearance. The reality would prove far different. Before Tim Bosma disappeared, another young person had already vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her name was Laura Babcock, and years later, investigators would conclude that her disappearance was not an isolated event. Laura was intelligent, outgoing, and ambitious. Friends described her as someone who cared deeply about the people around her. She had plans for her future. She had dreams. She had relationships. She had people who loved her. Among those relationships was a complicated connection to Dellan Millard. The exact nature of that relationship would later become a significant issue during criminal proceedings. By 2012, Laura remained connected to Dellan's social circle. Then something happened. She disappeared. At first, there was confusion. People assumed there might be a simple explanation. Maybe she had left voluntarily. Maybe she was taking time away. Maybe she simply wasn't communicating. But as weeks passed, concern grew. Family members could not reach her. Friends stopped hearing from her. Her digital presence largely disappeared. Her communication stopped. It was as if she had simply vanished. For those who knew Laura, the silence felt wrong. This wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't consistent with the person they knew. Yet despite growing concerns, investigators faced a major obstacle. There was very little evidence. No body, no obvious crime scene, no eyewitnesses describing an attack, no clear explanation. The case stalled. Months turned into years. Laura Babcock became one of countless missing persons whose fate remained unknown. Her family continued searching for answers, but answers never came, at least not yet. Unknown to investigators at the time, Laura's disappearance would eventually become one of the most important pieces of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that would not begin coming together until another family experienced a devastating loss. Tim Bosma was not living a high-profile life. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't involved in criminal activity. He was a husband and father, the type of person many viewers can immediately relate to. He worked. He cared about his family. He focused on everyday responsibilities. When he decided to sell his pickup truck, there was nothing unusual about the decision. People sell vehicles all the time. The internet had made the process easier than ever. Post an advertisement, talk to potential buyers, meet in person, complete the transaction. That was the plan, and Tim's advertisement attracted interest. Eventually, communication began with two men who claimed they wanted to purchase the truck. Those men were Dellan, Millard, and Mark Smith. The meeting was arranged. Everything appeared normal. The buyers arrived, questions were asked, the truck was inspected, and eventually Tim got into the vehicle with them. When he failed to return, his family knew something was wrong almost immediately. This wasn't normal behavior. Tim wasn't the type of person who disappeared without explanation. He wasn't the type of husband who ignored his family. He wasn't the type of father who simply walked away. As concern turned into panic, authorities were contacted. A missing persons investigation began. Initially, investigators hoped there might be an innocent explanation. Perhaps there had been an accident. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps Tim would return safely. But as detectives retraced his final known movements, those possibilities began disappearing. The last confirmed people to see Tim Bosma alive were Dellan, Millard, and Mark Smith. That fact immediately placed a spotlight on both men. Detectives began asking questions. Where had they gone? What happened during the test drive? Why hadn't Tim returned? The answers they received failed to eliminate suspicion. In fact, investigators became increasingly concerned. As media coverage expanded, public interest exploded. The disappearance dominated headlines. Canadians followed every development, every press conference, every new piece of information. People wanted answers. Tim Bosma's family wanted answers, and investigators were working around the clock to find them. Detectives began collecting digital evidence, phone records, surveillance footage, witness statements, vehicle data, financial information. Every detail mattered. One discovery immediately caught investigators' attention. The communication used to arrange the truck meeting involved a burner phone. That raised serious questions. Why would someone purchasing a vehicle need an anonymous phone? Why hide your identity? Why create distance between yourself and the transaction? To investigators, the burner phone suggested planning, not spontaneity, planning. As detectives dug deeper, additional concerns emerged. The timeline wasn't making sense. Certain statements appeared inconsistent. Certain movements appeared suspicious. Gradually, the investigation began shifting. What started as a missing persons case was becoming something else, something darker, something far more serious. Investigators eventually identified locations connected to Dellan Millard that they believed warranted closer examination. Search warrants were obtained, properties were searched, Evidence was collected. The public didn't know exactly what investigators had found, but authorities clearly believed they were moving closer to answers. The pressure continued building. Media outlets covered every development. Speculation grew, rumors spread, and through it all, Tim Bosma's family continued waiting, hoping, praying, searching for any sign that he might still be alive. Then investigators located Tim's truck. Finding the vehicle represented a major breakthrough, but it also created new questions. What had happened after the test drive? Where had the truck been? And most importantly, where was Tim? As forensic teams examined evidence and investigators continued assembling the timeline, a disturbing picture began emerging. The evidence was no longer pointing toward a voluntary disappearance. Investigators increasingly believed they were dealing with a homicide, and if that was true, they needed to determine exactly what had happened. As the investigation intensified, detectives uncovered information that would eventually transform the case completely. Because the evidence wasn't only pointing toward Tim Bosma, it was beginning to point toward Laura Babcock, the missing woman from the year before. The woman whose disappearance had never been solved. Suddenly, investigators were asking whether these cases might somehow be connected. The possibility was shocking. At first glance, the cases seemed unrelated. Different victims, different circumstances, different timelines. Yet investigators continued finding reasons to look closer, reasons to believe that the answers might overlap. And if they were right, the implications were enormous, because it would mean Tim Bosma wasn't the first person connected to Dellan Millard who had disappeared. He was simply the most recent. As authorities continued building their case, another question emerged, one that seemed almost impossible to believe. Investigators began examining the death of Wayne Millard, Dellan's father, the founder of the family aviation empire. Wayne had died from a gunshot wound. His death had originally been ruled a suicide. The case appeared closed, finished, resolved, but investigators were beginning to reconsider. Details that once seemed straightforward no longer looked quite so simple. And the more detectives examined the circumstances surrounding Wayne's death, the more questions they developed. Questions that would eventually lead them down a path nobody expected. A path that would transform a missing persons investigation into something far larger, something involving multiple victims, multiple investigations, and allegations that would shock the country. By this point, the image of Dellan Millard was changing dramatically. The wealthy heir, the aviation enthusiast, the future business leader. That image was being replaced by something else, something far darker, something investigators were only beginning to understand. And the evidence they were about to uncover would forever change the course of the investigation. Because hidden within the evidence was a discovery that would transform public perception of the case overnight. A discovery connected to an industrial incinerator. A discovery that prosecutors would later argue explained what happened to Tim Bosma, and a discovery that would lead investigators deeper into the mysteries surrounding Laura Babcock and Wayne Millard. The missing persons case was over. The murder investigation was about to begin.